Bobby Marks and the NBA insiders at ESPN.com asking what's next for the Sixers with the Colangelo scandal behind them. And a lot of questions to get into off of that. Of course, Bobby served time in the Brooklyn/New Jersey Nets front office, so he can certainly offer a lot of insight on this situation, which he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline with more insight. Bobby, I got to imagine this is a doozy, even in NBA circles where, some crazy stuff happens. I don't know where this one would rank for you in your experience, but this is up there, right?
I would think it would probably be up there with number one, and I think I had probably have seen everything in my 20 years with the Nets and I guess 3 years in the media, and this certainly, when it broke last Tuesday and how it's developed, and we got some resolution yesterday, I would say this ranks right up there.
You say we got some resolution. It seems, though, that Colangelo's statement and the investigator's statement and the Sixers statement, they're not all jiving with each other. So, yes, we have resolution that he's out, but it seems that if he's not on the same page as the investigators.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'm a Sixer fan or if I'm ownership or Brett Brown. I don't know if I need to worry about Bryan Colangelo right now. I think you hired that investigative group, the lawyers there, to find out what went wrong or who kind of get to some type of conclusion. They did it. They released a statement that resulted in Bryan Colangelo's resignation. And now you start preparing for. You've already been preparing for the draft, which is 2 weeks away. Free agency, and trying to find a general manager or somebody to lead that department. So I think there are still a lot of unanswered questions out there that probably a lot of us have some curiosity about. But at least you head into the weekend, and this issue is, or this turmoil is not lingering over this organization.
Bobby, you guys were asked at ESPN.com 5 questions, and I kind of want to go over some of them with you. One, your answer was unbelievable, by the way, about where you were when you found out the news about this actual story and what NBA people have been saying about this story.
Yeah, I mean, I was in Los Angeles at Harvard Westlake. We were out there last week for these pro days, these agent pro days, and I was actually standing next to Bryan when I had gotten a notification from someone I work with at ESPN asking if I had read this article from The Ringer. I had not even heard about it. They had sent me the link to the article, and I read it and literally had to walk out of the building because I was uncomfortable standing next to Bryan, reading it. And, got in my car and drove back to the hotel because I knew I'd have some work to do. I think probably the one thing I probably regret a little bit is that, and I'm not an investigative journalist or, in that end, and this is kind of all the newness to me is that, I mean, if I had a do-over, I would have probably asked Bryan for a comment based on it. I don't know if I would have gotten one. I did not see Bryan the next day. He did not go to the pro days that were held on Wednesday. And, and it's, and that's where I was.
Hey, Bobby, what were others' reaction in the building? Because it seemed like this spread, you got the link texted to you. Well, once that link started to sort of make its rounds, it was like wildfire. Other people were finding out about it too. What were their reaction in the building? Were they kind of distancing themselves from Bryan Colangelo? Did he appear to look stunned?
No, he didn't. He didn't. I think the reaction the following day was that people were. It was hard. There was so much information there that it was hard to. Was this Bryan? I was texting with somebody from the media. I had thought all along it was somebody, a family member, right from the get-go. I mean, that was my first instinct here because I don't think it would have been Bryan. I understand where he said he did have an account that was not his name, was under his name, but everybody does. I mean, if you're a team and you're a GM, there are a lot of teams that have burner accounts, but you just don't tweet from it. You use it to follow people, or you keep up to date with the media. You don't interact or like or reply or retweet. And I think it was the couple days in Los Angeles, it was just like, where are we going with this? Like, how is this going to end? And I think the more it played out, you had a sense that it was not going to end well for Bryan, even if it was not him, but it was, if it was a connection to their wife or son or somebody related to him, based on just those two being together.
And you're right, Bobby. It was a long story, a comprehensive story. It's not the kind that you click on the link and read it on your phone just standing there in 5 seconds, because there was so much content in it and layer upon layer. So what part of that original Ringer story was the most concerning or the most damning for you? I
think the criticism of your own players, whether it be Joel, considering that he is your franchise, along with Ben and, I think Dario, we could probably start putting up there. That is your franchise cornerstone. I think as I wrote yesterday, you're fortunate that you signed him for an extension. That imagine going into free agency with this looming over the shadows of Joel Embiid. I think the information about Markelle Fultz, about being in the gym and from a shooting perspective with his shooting coach, the information regarding Jahlil Okafor was concerning, where there was from the physical standpoint, trade discussions, the possibility of him failing a physical that maybe held up a trade. I think those were the most concerning, for me at least, the most concerning, issues. And I thought that's why it would have been hard to have Bryan come back, because you would have been having damage control 101, not with Masai Ujiri in Toronto, who there was also some negative things said about him, but because a lot of it was in-house.
Talking with Bobby Marks right here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. You mentioned the in-house nature of it. So now that Bryan is gone, is there any stink around the Sixers, or are they kind of evolved as an organization?
I don't think so. I think I think I guess the positive, if there is any positive, is that we're in the first week of June, and this didn't happen. I mean, can you imagine it happened right before, free agency, if this happened right after the draft? So I think you have a good group there right now with Ned Cohen, who is from, worked in the league office for a long time, Mark Eversley, who was in Toronto and Washington from the scouting. There's a lot of holdover from a scouting perspective with the group that Sam Hinkie had inherited or brought on. There are still people left there. So I'm not concerned at all from a scouting going into the draft. It's just happened that, there's turmoil there. I'm not concerned at all. I think what you have to have is probably a plan going into free agency, just based on, how much, the cap space, what happens if a trade pops up, as far as kind of who is running things there. Because, I was in New Jersey in 2010 when, we went into free agency, into the draft, and Rod Thorne, who was our president at the time, announced that he was going to be with the organization, post free agency. And that kind of just leaves a lot of unanswered questions when you start meeting with free agents as far as who is in charge here. And I think that's kind of, if I was advising the Sixers, I think it's important to have somebody in place, not at the time of the draft, but when you get going on July 1st.
Yeah, and right now, it seems that for the draft anyway, Josh Harris said they're not all that
consensus.
Yeah, they're not all that interested in making a quick move to get someone in by the draft. So do you look at Brett Brown, and you mentioned Cohen and Mark Eversley, did they have enough intel there to kind of go forward and handle the draft? They do have 6 picks. If someone was to call the Sixers, I mean, who takes that call? How do you think that would be handled, if you were in that situation where you have been before, if the GM just completely got blown out 2 weeks before the draft?
Well, I think what you do is that Mark and Ned are the guys on the phones as far as handling calls trade-wise. I think anything like that, if there is something that makes sense, it's brought to Brett Brown, who brings it to ownership. And I think you have a good sense as far as if you stay pat, what your group of players are going to be at 10. 26 is a little bit different because what falls there. I think the one thing would be to keep an eye on is what happens with the 4 second-round picks, as far as, are you drafting to keep or a player overseas, or are you looking to sell and maybe get future assets there? I think the structure right now is fine. I think there is enough intel out there that these guys have been doing their job. They've done the background. They've done the medical. They've done the psychological. You see, the workouts are still going on in Philadelphia as far as upgrade of players coming in. So there's certainly a good comfort level. The only concern would be what happens on June 19th and Kawhi Leonard becomes available all of a sudden. Now, who is making that final decision there? Is it the ownership? Is it Brett Brown without a general manager in place? And who is putting that deal together? I think that would be really my only big concern. And the likelihood that happens, I don't think it will happen. But if you're kind of trying to pick apart it, that would be the one thing that I would be concerned about.
So, Bobby, Joshua Harris was asked about Sam Hinkie. Would you consider Sam Hinkie a candidate to come back, or is there a name that you think would be a good fit for this team? Because there's been some reports from your partner at ESPN, Woj, that current GMs are calling their agent to say, hey, how can I get an interview over there? I want to go over there.
Well, I was asked yesterday by somebody that how would I rank the Sixers GM job, and I would say I would probably rank it right up there, at least in the top 3. Based on, I mean, you have a 52-win team that is still top 5 in the NBA in average age. You've got some great young core pieces with Joel and Ben and Dario and Covington. We don't know what's going to happen, where Fultz is going to be. You've got 6 picks in the draft, and you've got potential to have a max slot to go out and chase Paul George or LeBron James. Who wouldn't want that job? I mean, it's not like you are inheriting, and no offense to Detroit, it's not like you are walking into a Pistons team that has $120 million in cap space and you traded away your lottery pick to the Clippers for Blake Griffin. I mean, you go into a situation where you can still kind of put your fingerprints on this team and mold it how you want it. So I think the guy I would give a long look at would be certainly David Griffin, who is in Cleveland, and who has paid his dues and has been out of the league doing some media work this year and has put together a championship team with getting LeBron back there. I think he would certainly be an interesting name, to watch here.
Bobby Marks is with us, ESPN.com front office NBA insider. He served in the New Jersey Brooklyn Nets front office for a number of years as an assistant general manager. And, I'd like to get your take because there was some thoughts, reports out there that Colangelo wanted to hire D'Antoni, and, of course, he went to Phoenix. And then once he left, that they turned their attention to a guy like Jay Wright. And I wonder if this shows that the ownership was really the one that was backing Brett Brown more so than the Colangelo duo.
Well, I think Brett Brown has a fun. I mean, from an ownership standpoint, there is an appreciation for Brett Brown, and going to those games when you were going when you were rebuilding and you're winning 15 to 18 games or even less, and you've got 8,000 people in that building. The mood of Brett Brown or his demeanor is the same person in 2015 to where it is right now. And I think you have a certain trust level with him that he could be the face, besides your own players, the face of this organization. Because things do not bother him. And I think from an ownership standpoint, there is an appreciation there. That here's a guy that, kind of rode the wave here of a team that won, as I said, 10 to 12 games here, and was, he's a survivor. And I think I understand when a front office comes in and you want your own people in place, but sometimes the people who are already there are the most qualified.
Yeah, and obviously, many people thought that Bryan was the most qualified. That's why he had the job when it was open when Sam resigned, back in 2015. But there was a lot of skepticism about how that all went down. Do you think the NBA does have a little bit of egg on their face with this whole situation?
I don't know. I mean, Bryan still had, his qualifications were still good. I mean, you could put him up there with a lot of people, with his tenure in Phoenix and then in Toronto. He was in 2 spots and he was the general manager of teams that he decided to the playoffs multiple times. I think, when you start linking, with Jerry being there as an advisor and then, basically his son, sure, you can make that claim that Bryan had an advantage there. But, I think, Bryan also interviewed in Brooklyn, for that GM job before Sean Marks got it. So it wasn't like he wasn't up for any other jobs.
You ever been in a situation where the front office comes together on an agreement or something, and the ownership kind of steps in and says, nope, you guys aren't doing that? I mean, is that something that happens more frequently than the fans maybe think? Because I think we all just look at the GM and say, he didn't do this, or he didn't make that move, or how come he didn't do that? How much does the owner sometimes say, guys, I hear what you're saying, not happening?
Well, I think any type of time when you're doing a trade either or signing a player, anything, it always has to be run through ownership. And I think you have to, if you're the general manager, you're the front office, you better make a compelling case on why you are signing that player or why you are making that trade, if you are taking on money or if it's going to impact, impact the future of your team. I mean, we were in Jersey in 2001 before that Jason Kidd trade when we acquired Kidd from Phoenix. And, I mean, if it was up to our ownership group, they would not have done the deal. I mean, they basically said no to the trade. And we had, Rod Thorne, who had been in the league office for a long time. And we had Lou Amorello, who, from the Devils, who's now with the Islanders, who was with, we were kind of all together, who really pushed the deal to get over the finish line and made a strong case to our ownership group to do the deal, which they eventually did, and that got us to two NBA finals. So I think if you have enough conviction on why a trade should be made or a player should be signed, I think you can push it through the finish line.
So now they're in a situation. They've got a lot of key decisions. They don't really have a GM. They do have Brett serving as the interim president of basketball operations. So what do you think right now is the most important thing, the next step for this organization?
Of course, the draft. I mean, you're going to get at pick 10, you're going to get an impact player. So I think you've got to have a short list there going into the night of the draft, and I think you have to have a strong familiarity with the players that are going to be in that mix. If it's Colin Sexton or Mikal Bridges or Miles Bridges, that type of group right there. I think you have to have a plan B in place if you are not able to go out and get a LeBron James or a Paul George. I think the worst case scenario is either panic in free agency and go out and spend that money on long-term money on some of these tier B type free agents. I think if you miss out, I think you've got to be reactive as far as do you back a player like J.J. Redick or Bellinelli or Ilyasova, that group here. So, I mean, the interesting thing is that, the draft is June 21st and free agency is 10 days later. So everything kind of, we're in a 3-week timeline here. So I think you just need to make sure that from the draft to free agency that everything is lined up.
There's so much, man, this is such a bizarre story. And I mean, I guess with free agency here, you would think that they could go through the draft without a GM, but you mentioned free agency, they got to get somebody here. But I want to ask you, how important is the GM? Because not that Josh Harris kind of squashed Colangelo, but he did suggest that Brett was the recruiter and the salesman, on J.J. Redick. He said he had him in the gym, and, imagine Joel Embiid in the post, passing the ball out to you. Like, in today's day and age with the superstars, is the GM that important of a role?
I think from a recruiting standpoint, the head coach has a bigger role. And I think although Bryan and his group were able to get JJ as a free agent and brought in Marco Bellinelli and Ersan Ilyasova, post-trade deadline, I give Brett Brown a lot of credit for recruiting those three players and him having a strong role in getting there, because I don't know if Brett Brown was the coach, those guys would have been in the Sixers uniform there. So I think for free agency standpoint, the head coach has a huge role, because that's the person who is coaching you. I think Brett getting an extension was huge, because now you have stability and that person's going to be there for the next 3 years. I think from a GM's perspective, I think the role of them is important as far as from how do you build the roster. As from a cap perspective, how do you make the pieces work? And I think the coach certainly has a role in that.
Bobby, you talked about different names for possible replacement of GM, and of course, David Griffin's name keeps coming up. Mike Zarin's name keeps coming up from Boston, but and of course the two internal guys, Eversley and Ned Cohen. But how about some other names that people, your average fan, they remember Elton Brand, they remember Malik Rose, and they certainly remember Trajan Langdon. Those are three names that are out there that may not necessarily be more thought of as front office guys. They may be thought as players guys, but are they legitimate contenders for this position?
I think they should. I think they should, especially if they're, they all have, at least for, Elton, and Malik, there's a prior relationship, with the head coach. I think, and that's another thing too, is that you better be attached at the hip with who you are working with from a head coaching standpoint, and your views have to be on the same page as the coach as far as how you go about drafting, trading for, and signing here, and you can't go about trading for a player and have a disagreement about it, a month later here. So sometimes the biggest name out there, if it is maybe a David Griffin, who I think they certainly should consider, maybe that, you can get it, you can find an under the radar person if it is an Elton Brand, and you surround him with the right pieces as far as the current group that's there right now.
Now, Brett Brown yesterday seemed to indicate he was happy with the interim title but didn't want to be a permanent guy in that role. Do you think that coaches can work in that role? Because we've seen the Stan Van Gundy's of the world or the Budenholzers or the Doc Rivers who try to do that dual role, and one side suffers.
I think it's a challenge to have a dual role. The proof out there has not shown that it's been a struggle. When you look at Atlanta, you look at the Clippers, you look at Detroit. Not really about the off season, but more what happens when we get going here in September and October. And the coaches, you are worrying about the day to day on the court. You are not worrying about making a trade that could help you 2 years from now. So that's where my concern would be as far as when you have somebody in that number one role.
Hey, Bobby, I know Pete asked you earlier about Sam, and yesterday Josh kind of said, hey, we appreciate where he got us. Are you surprised that he has not gotten a job yet, and do you have any thoughts on why he hasn't had a job? And at this stage of the game where the Sixers are, would a more experienced GM be the way to go with where they are in their development?
Well, I think from, if I'll answer the second question first. From where they are, they're a team that's, right there. So I think you have to have, certainly have some experience, because how can you push this team over the finish, as I said, over the finish line? How do you get this team to a Eastern Conference final or an NBA Finals as far as adding around? So I think that's where an experienced, front office or GM helps. With Sam, I don't know. I think, how it ended in Philadelphia, I know he's at a pretty good place in his life out west, doing some things on non-basketball wise that I think if there's an opportunity for Sam Hinkie to get back in, I certainly think he will. And I think eventually we will see Sam, run a team. I think he would be, he's a great mind to kind of pick his mind as far as how teams are being built or how things should be built. So, and in how the NBA goes, there's always a constant turnover within the front office. So, I would not be surprised down the road that we do see Sam back in the front office.
Okay, Bobby Marks, former front office executive with the Nets, now ESPN.com, NBA front office insider here, and what a bizarre story this has been. And man, I didn't realize that you were standing right next to Colangelo when the story broke. Holy mackerel, what an odd situation. But, Bobby, we do always appreciate a couple minutes, and we'll talk to you before the draft, pal.
Thanks, guys.